Welcome to Iron and Serena, Librarius Omnis, where we explore the depths of the Black Library.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to Iron and Serena present Librarius Omnis, and we are continuing our review of Fulgrim. This week we are on part 3, Visions of Threachery. Hopefully you've already watched parts 1 and 2. If you haven't, go back and watch those, and then you'll be able to jump straight in with us on part 3. So before we get into it, Shane, hello again.
Hello, good to be back.
Haven't seen you in a while.
No, I mean, you know, it's been that long that I've gone through an entire wash cycle and I happen to be in the same clothes.
Me too. It's very strange. But I have got a fresh cider.
But always important. Being refreshed is incredibly important during these videos.
Exactly. So before we crack on with part 3, do you want to help me recap parts 1 and 2?
Yes, sure thing. So try to keep it brief as the videos are there, but obviously part 1, a big introduction to the Emperor's children and their Primarch Fulgrim. They're a chapter that's very much about perfection, the seeking of perfection in all things, both military and in art. And that's reflected as well that while concurrent events are happening in the Legion, they have a fleet of remembrancers who, kind of unlike the other remembrances in the other legions, are very much from artist stock, so sculptors, singers, composers, painters, as opposed to what you might consider like war correspondents in the other chapters. And in part 1, the chapters had like a heavy engagement with an alien species called the Lair on the planet Laren. And as we've seen this go on, we've seen Fulgrim find himself the what's referred to as the Lair Blade in one of the Laren temples. We're also introduced to his captains, so Solomon Demeter, Julius Caesaron, and Marius Verosian, as well as the Lord Commanders Eidolon and Vespasian. And then regular returning characters for the first 4 books at least anyway, Sol Tarvitz and Lucius, who are captains as well in other companies of the Emperor's Children. And so we get the introduction to all of those guys in part 1, and we have the Lair is really, and the Lair conflict is the big narrative piece. We then kind of moved into book 2, where we get much more of an introduction to the Iron Hands, the kinship and brotherhood that Ferrus Manus, the Primarch of the Iron Hands, and Fulgrim share, and that's come from a history where they met and they forged each other's weapons in a spirited competition, as it were. And what we find out is that the Iron Hands have been struggling to execute a say a Xenos race, but they're not really Xenos. It's like a Xenos human hybrid, so a collaboration, a community of humans and Xenos, called the Disparex, and they eventually hunt them down with the aid of the Emperor's children. So the Iron Hands finally get it done, and we left the end of the conflict where Fulgrim has he's narrowly survived an attack from the Disparex that was saved by Ferrus, landed on board the ship, ready to take the bridge, and unfortunately for him, one of his other captains, Solomon Demeter, has gone up the center, which is a common theme for Solomon. He's gone up the center, he's taken the bridge, and Fulgrim and Julius, who have been obviously exposed to the energies of the Lair in part 1, are not particularly happy about this. They're seeking perfection, but actually it's moving more and more into sensation. And whilst this has all been happening concurrently, the remembrances that we talked about, in particular the ones that have been down to the Lair Temple, are some of them are struggling in their artistic endeavors. One of them being Serena D'Angelis, who is the artist that is being commissioned by many of the Emperor's children to do portraits and vistas, and she's struggling to find the right vibrancy with her paints, and it's not until she accidentally spills part of her blood in her paint set that she finds that vibrancy. So there's a bit of foreshadowing there. It gets pretty dark with Serena. And then obviously the other remembrances that are there, they're all experiencing these new ways of doing things, from music, sculpting, poetry, and those that weren't there, they're sticking to their tried and trusted methods and are kind of looking on a little bit, in almost confusion as to what's going on. But anyway, that was whirlwind of part 2, and touching a little bit on part 3. But we're here to talk about that now, so I won't go on too much more about part 3. John, I don't know if I missed much in part 2 there, but I think that covers most of it.
No, I mean, if you really don't feel like we've done justice, by all means, please go back and watch part 1 and 2.
Yeah.
And then come back to this one, because otherwise the video would be an hour of recapping and we'd never get anywhere. As much as we like talking about it, but we've done that already, so we'll crack on. So yes, like you say, we're 2 parts in, and we're 2 alien races destroyed, and now we join into part 3, Visions of Treachery, and we're not going to start with any Astartes at all. We're going to start with the Eldar. We're introduced to Eldred Alfred, the Farseer of an alien craft world.
Ulfoy.
Yeah. What is a craft world for those who may be watching or even here that aren't 100% sure?
So a craft world is, so with the Eldar, like the same with their armor and their wraith lords and everything like that, is a lot of their constructs look like they're made from like a bone material, and that's very much the same as a craft world. A craft world is like it is a world in essence, but it's like it's a spacefaring world. So it's not the size of a planet, but it's much bigger than, say, a battle barge or a flagship that you would see in the Imperium. It's a whole enclosed ecology that the Eldar that are on board it will survive, live, spend their lives, possibly even die in that entire period of time, just living aboard these craft worlds that float through the Materium, and they are the safe haven for the Eldar race. And every craft world has a slightly different character to it. And in this particular instance, we're introduced to craft world Ulfoy, which has, again, its own character and is led. It's not quite led. It's steered by a Farseer, and a Farseer is like an Eldar. It's not really noble. They are a psyker, but then actually a lot of the Eldar have latent psychic abilities, but they're very powerful psykers, and they have the ability of foresight and visions, as it were, as to what's come. It's not always clear, and the one that happens to be guiding Ulfoy is Eldred Alfred. He was quite a famous character in 40k lore. He's been around for a long time. He's still around now.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he is. He's still around now. He's a lot of stuff happens to him. Like, it's again, he's died in the wall, part of the 40k like universe from back in 2nd edition right up to now.
Oh, wow.
So he's been around, and still a playable character, I believe. But yeah, he plays a really important part here as well. But that as in a very, because we could have an entire video about what the Eldar are the craft world. The other thing I suppose to note about the Eldar, and this goes back into deeper lore here, is that they're one of the older races in the current universe. They were actually created by a species or a group called the Old Ones, back long before, and they were created alongside the precursors to the Orcs. So the Eldar and the Orcs were created at the same sort of time, and they were there created by the Old Ones as a potential way to combat what at the time was the Necrontyr and the Satan. And so the Eldar have been around, and they effectively, grew to a point where they were the dominant race in the galaxy. They were ruling the galaxy, and their entire race eventually grew to a point of dominance where they didn't have to worry about things like war, doing much. All they needed to worry about was the pursuit of pleasure. It was where they go to next, what happens next. And that's actually what started the craft worlds, because some of the Eldar were like, well, actually, we don't want to live this hedonistic lifestyle. We don't, we're doing weird stuff. We don't want to be doing this anymore. We're gonna leave, and we're gonna take our kind of our old ways, the more humble ways, with us. And they formed these craft worlds and left. Some of them didn't. Some of them
unfortunate for them.
Yeah, some of them became the Dark Eldar, where they were like, we're going to keep doing this, and we're going to go full on. And it was their fall. It was the Eldar fall that their psychic turbulence that they were creating with this pursuit of pleasure, that then gave birth to a particular Chaos God, the youngest of the Chaos Gods, at least in this setting, and gave birth to Slaanesh.
And that's sort of where we tie in and we join Eldred, because he's meditating on board his ship, remembering how he managed to save some of his people from the destruction of his race. And he's specifically remembering the overindulgencies of his people, and getting them the hell out of there before they were all their souls were sucked into the warp and consumed. Right. And if you've watched part 1 and 2 and you haven't twigged yet, where the previous books were very nurgly, this book is very Slaanesh-y. And I think, Eldred gives us the name of the god that we're worrying about here. So he's meditating, and his meditations are interrupted because he's having visions of another devastating event similar to what birthed Slaanesh. He can just see something's coming in. It clearly involves the human race, but he can't work out exactly what it is. And he has the ability to actually reach into the warp and sort of see events that are transpiring elsewhere. And as we mentioned, I believe in part 1, the first 2 parts of Fulgrim are happening while the sons of the Lunar Wolves are fighting on Davin, on the moon of Davin, and our Eldar friend here is seeing this battle happening. And he's seeing a particular warrior fighting through a plague-infested planet. He's fighting through swarms of the undead. And as he's watching this mighty warrior, he's seeing his deeds just twist into darkness. And then he's hearing the name War Master echo through his mind. So obviously he's seeing the fall of Horus. Although he doesn't know what it is or who he is or what's happening, he's starting to get these visions, and he'll be left to his meditations to try and figure this out.
Yeah, he like there's a point of it where it kind of he sort of says, like, talks about us, or talks about the humans in the setting as a a race that even faced with the inevitable, they won't accept it. And he's like, but you can't change it. And then he thinks, well, maybe they can. Maybe they can.
Yeah.
But it's going to, and obviously you get the understanding, you get the very on the nose Eldar name for the human race, which is the Monkey.
How the hell has monkey travelled further through the galaxy than the word human?
No, Monkey. It's not monkey. It's Monkey.
Well, okay. That's not how I read it. But although I can't pronounce half the names that are in this book.
It's very, very on the nose, and you're like,
yeah.
It's one of those things that you look at every now and then with Games Workshop, and you go, "Come on, guys, come on."
Oh man, yeah. So we sort of leave him for a while, and like you mentioned before, at the end of the last video, Fulgrim and the Emperor's children have parted ways with Ferrus Manus and the Iron Hands. Any surviving humans from the Disparax have been collected. They have been sent off to nearby planets and sold into slavery. And any alien that survived have been destroyed. The ships have been blown up, and the Mechanicum have been allowed to remain behind and study and collect anything they can find in the wreckage.
And remember, they are the good guys.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't remember, the Disparax just wanted to be left alone.
Yeah,
they weren't up for fighting, but they did not accept the good word of the Emperor, and
they weren't interested in the Imperial truth. So
no, they were given the chance. In all fairness, they were told,
"It's their own fault. Right?
Ditch the aliens, and you can go to these homeworlds and carry on." But unfortunately, they're still going to those homeworlds, but now they're slaves. So
good guys. Just keep,
good guys.
Good guys.
We're cheering for you guys. So the Iron Hands, they're gone, and Fulgrim's fleet have moved on to the Perdus anomaly.
That's it. There we go.
Which we could not remember for love nor money before.
I knew there was a P in there, and I was like,
yeah.
And it's something to do with there's something wrong with it. It's the anomaly part. It's the Perdus anomaly.
And the other thing that we didn't know. So although I told you the name of Cornelius, the heretical priest, Cornelius Blake, the book that he wrote was the Book of Urizen, or Urizen.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So that's just popped up on my notes here. So, and what reminds me of that is Julius, he's on board his ship and he's struggling to keep himself occupied. He's doing whatever, but the second that he's done with that task, he's immediately bored and in despair. He's been down to the practice cages.
Yeah, I was going to say he's already knocked. He's beaten up 3 servitors, isn't he?
Yeah, and he's putting them on. Essentially, he's putting them on kill mode, and he's smashing them to pieces. And he's at the highest of highs. He's taking injuries, and he's feeling great. And then he kills these machines that should have killed him, and he immediately goes from, instead of having that moment of, even like if you do exercise, you feel good for a little while. He's putting his sword down and he's immediately depressed. Like that's the worst thing that ever happens to him. He is now reading the Book of Urizen, and it's mentioned if he had read this before going to Lorraine, he would have been disgusted by the content. But actually, he's reading it and he can't get enough. Like this is really thrilling him. It's all about excess. This priest who obviously is spouting his own religion. He's into excess. I mean, he probably wouldn't be a very good priest, really, but he's kept the title. And Julius can't get enough of his exploits and is obviously getting quite inspired by it. So Julius is bored and he is getting his influences from the wrong places now. Elsewhere, well, not elsewhere, the Emperor's children are now all back together. Eidolon's detachment have returned from their peacekeeping mission, which didn't stay very peaceful as they visited the wonderful planet of Murder, which if you haven't read it or didn't hear our review of it, like A Murder was a great scene, great place.
Go back and listen to it. We won't talk too much about, again, how on the nose the planet name is and what transpires there. But,
No.
you know, with a name like Murder, you get the gist.
Yeah, go back. It was great. The captains and Fulgrim all gathered in their warrior lodge, and they're celebrating being back together. Eidolon has been asked to recount the actions of Murder, and he tells a very different version of events, and he really plays up the Emperor's Children role. If you need to go back and pay attention to what happened for this to make sense, but he's missing out the parts where, because Eidolon was in charge of this, and he essentially almost led the Emperor's Children detachment into destruction and ruin. But he is not telling that story. He's putting the glory on the Emperor's Children, especially on the way that he commanded the mission.
Yeah, definitely no honor to the Lunar Wolves, and I think he states clearly
and
that
the Blood Angels.
That they were there to rescue the Blood Angels, whereas pre the mission itself, there was no rescue. It was to assist.
It was to reinforce, wasn't it?
That was a reinforce, yeah.
And like on that point, Tarvitz is shocked because, like you say, it had been a reinforcement mission to help out their brothers, because it was mentioned back at the time that the word rescue is an insult. Especially for the Blood Angels, you wouldn't say we rescued you, because that would be the ultimate insult. And Tarvitz has to sort of bite his tongue a bit. They then have a little feast, or not a little feast, because it's all about excess now. And Fulgrim throws them a feast, and Sol and Lucius are talking to Solomon, who noticed while Eidolon was talking, he was paying attention and saw the reactions of Sol, and has decided to come and introduce himself, and asks him the truth of it. And Lucius immediately gets his back up, and he's like, well, who are you to question our heroics? You weren't there. Because to be fair to Lucius, so far everything he's done has been pretty impressive. He gave a good account of himself, but obviously to throw Eidolon's integrity into question will probably strike up with him as well. And immediately Solomon's opinion of Lucius and Tarvitz is swapped, because as we mentioned when we were first introduced to them, Solomon looked at Tarvitz and thought that's a line officer and nothing more, and looked at Lucius and thought he's going places. But now his respect for Lucius sort of dropped because of the way he's very insolent towards, although he is a captain, he's not the second captain as Solomon is, and there is still rank within captaincy.
Yeah, absolutely. Worth noting here as well, Lucius and Tarvitz, along with Solomon, and Eidolon, actually, thinking about it. None of them have been to the Lair Temple.
No.
They weren't, but although Solomon was on Lairan activity, he obviously crashed out. Sol and Lucius were with Eidolon on the peacekeeping side of things. So, you know, even though you look at it and you go, well, Lucius is a bit of a dick. Like, he's not because he's corrupted. It's just because he's a bit of a dick.
Some people are just born that way, aren't they?
That's it. Yeah.
So they sort of have that. Lucius storms off because he's not having it. He won't be talked down to, and Solomon gets buddy with Tarvitz, which is good. We've got our two good guys finally found each other, which is what we wanted. And they sort of know the truth of what's going on, although they haven't seen the extent of it yet, as they've only just got back together. But they are our sort of window into sanity.
thing to note here as well, I believe this has happened, although your notes may tell me wrong and I may be jumping in the wrong place, is that I believe at this point Lucius has had his nose busted.
Yes, he had his nose busted by Loken in the training cages, which at the time really tempered him quite badly.
I would go back and go back to the other books just for that scene because it is good.
Yeah.
And as I said, Lucius being one of those, I love him as a character, but it's good seeing this sort of stuff happen to him.
Yeah, definitely. It sort of, well, I mean, he's the best swordsman in the Emperor's Children, as it's mentioned, and it will be mentioned again. And Loken really showed him up.
Loken did what a Marine should do. He adapted, and instead of just having a sword fight, he punched him in the face.
Which a lot of us are going to want to do probably by the end of this.
Indeed.
Cool. So the Emperor's Children proceed to a new planet called 28-4, because they're the 28th expedition, and 4 is the 4th planet they've come across that they're going to take over, as is the theme throughout all of these books. They land on the planet. It appears to be completely uninhabited, but is very beautiful. It's a very lush place. Nature is very much in charge. Hasn't been despoiled by anything. The only thing they find is like a ruin far away from where they've landed that they're going to go and inspect. And that's pretty much all we get for that.
Do we get? Is it on this part that one of the captains, it might be Solomon, is over, or it might be Julius, but they're one of them's looking over it, and they're kind of going, oh, it is beautiful, but they're imagining what it's going to be like, or what's going to happen to it when the Mechanicus turn up and the Imperial Landers get there and they start whatever hive world it's going to be.
I'm not quite sure when that bit happens, but you're right, that because it's before anything too key happens. But yeah, there is definitely the appreciating what they're looking at, and then thinking it's a shame because we're going to turn this into a industrial wasteland pretty soon. Because that's what the Imperium does. They land, they turn it into factories to help expand and push out.
It's all resources for the Imperium, right?
Yeah, which is a shame. But yeah, that's definitely is a fault that goes through somebody's head. It might even be Solomon. You might be right.
I can't remember which one it is, because I remember they. This isn't just. I'll double check here. We're not at the point where we're on the planet that they actually meet. No,
because they do a few planets.
That's it. So this is the first of the planets that they.
Because that fault definitely happens. I didn't write it down, but I might have in a bit. But yeah, that definitely happens, and then they all have a proper discussion about it later on.
Yeah.
Cool. Right. So Ostian, back up on the ship. He's in the theatre. I can't remember what it's called. Le Fanis.
Oh, Le Fanis. Le Fanis.
Le Fanis.
It's not. So Le Fanis is not the theatre. It's like the way that I always thought about it is it's kind of. I think it has the theatre in there, so it's more like the back bar. It's like the Remembrances, the artistic social club, right?
Yeah, it's got it's got the bar in there. It's got the stage where they're all practicing, and I think it's like, in my head, that's the smaller area, and then behind the curtain is the theatre where, in the first part where Beckwith was doing her performance, where everyone will go eventually, to watch whatever they do. Yeah, so I'm pretty sure that's behind the curtain, so to speak.
But it's the area where all the artists, the painters, the poets, it's their area to, but in times before the visit to the lair, it's the place where they'd all go and get pissed up. Now it's taken a bit of a turn. Yeah,
so it's been completely redesigned. As we have discovered, that Fulgrim has commissioned anybody who went to the planet of the lair has been given free reign to create and be as artistic as they want, and anybody else has been told to basically keep it to themselves. But unfortunately, the minds have been so twisted that beauty is clearly like in the eye of the beholder now. So anyone who's been to the lair are creating these works of art that, to me or you who haven't been corrupted, it's just vile and disgusting. There's nothing appealing about it. And he's Austin's sitting there trying to work out what he's not understanding, why this has become the new trend. The music that's playing isn't what he would call music. It's a wailing, screeching noise that is just not pleasant to listen to. But everybody else seems to be digging it. And he's sat there talking to a poet who's a bit of a loser, who's a bit of a drunk,
bit of a hack.
And he's not a very good poet because Austin's like read a bit of it. He's no Carcassonne. And they're having a bit of a chat about how everybody who went to the temple was getting to do whatever they want, and they've all been left out. And Austin's also sort of pondering that he hasn't seen Serena since she went to the temple. She's sort of been locked away, and he's sort of ruining his chances. Where like before she went, they were definitely a love interest waiting to happen. But she's come back, and he's just not. Neither of them have given each other the time.
No.
And he's going to set out to correct that soon. And he's also remembering that so the reason he's in the bar is because he needs a drink, because he had a lovely visit from the Primarch himself. So he was back in his studio, and he's finally decided what he's going to carve, because for the last two parts, he's had this big slab of marble from, we think, Terra, that he hasn't been able to decide what he's going to do. And Fulgrim, as he's working on it, he turns around and sees that the Phoenix Guard and Fulgrim have let themselves into his studio. And Fulgrim's admiring his work and asks him, what are you carving? And he tells him, eventually this is going to be a statue of the Emperor.
Yeah.
And Fulgrim says, as it should be, loved by all. And Fulgrim tells him, I love your work, and you're the best sculptor that we have. You're number one. I'd love you to give me some advice. And as you mentioned previously, he's brought 3 sculpts with him that Fulgrim has made himself. And they are sculpts of Julius, Solomon, and Marius, his first 3 captains. And he says, what can I do to improve them? He's come for a bit of constructive criticism. And to labour the point, meeting Ostian being in the presence of a Primarch isn't nothing. It's, as it's mentioned, like Julius, prior to visiting the lair and things happening to him, he would have the slightest amount of nerves going to visit Fulgrim, somebody that he's been fighting alongside for 100 odd years or more. So now we've got a mortal man who's probably never even spoken to Fulgrim, and Fulgrim's come asking him for help. To how can I do what you do? And bearing in mind, Fulgrim is the Primarch of perfection, basically. So Ostian has a look at them, and he thinks that these statues are perfect, but they've been very much done from the mind and not from the heart, as he should work. And although they're perfect, the artistry isn't quite there.
It's too perfect, isn't it? There's no passion, there's no story, there's no. They've almost been done mechanically. I think what was interesting about this as well is that it took Fulgrim a long time, or a bit of time anyway, to get Ostian to open up. Like, he keeps telling him, like, no, it's okay, I want to know, be honest, you can tell me. Whereas actually he doesn't really want to know. He wants his ego patted. He wants to be told these are perfect.
He really grinds on him, doesn't he? Because even Ostian tells him, no, they're perfect, they're perfect. And Fulgrim's not an idiot, and he says, no, tell me the truth. And like you say, he didn't want that.
No, they're too perfect, and that is it's interesting because it's like what Ostian, and we'll come on to, because this is a bit of an arc for Ostian, is what he's getting at is that, you know, perfection is almost unattainable, and when you do it, if you do attain it, it's not what you actually need it or want it to be, and actually imperfection is perfect, because, and he talks about it himself in some of his other things, it's knowing when he has to put down his tools. Like, it has to be left imperfect for it to be perfect. Whereas Fulgrim is, you know, he's almost done this mechanical, perfect realization of the captains, but in doing that has created something quite sterile and something that's missing the passion that you would get from an artist.
Yeah, I imagine like you could stand either one of the captains next to that statue, and it would be a spitting image, but there'd be nothing behind, like, I don't know, behind the eyes of it. It would just be a statue.
Yeah, nothing to move the viewer of said statue.
Yeah, exactly. And then Ostian, obviously, we know that he has that art to he could do exactly the same, but it will be very lifelike rather than physically correct. And Fulgrim did not want the truth. He wanted his ego boosted. And Fulgrim very maturely says he will never waste his time sculpting again. And he turns and storms out. And Ostian sort of left. I mean, I don't know how you'd feel that you've upset the Primarch, the one person that everyone's here to impress, and you have absolutely ruined his day.
Yeah, it's a pretty dark time for Austin. He's like, he kind of sees it after he's given the feedback. He realizes, he stops and he's like, oh, like, this is not what he wanted. What have I done? And for a normal mortal, it's like, right, it's time to get on the pop. This is no time to think about anything else but maybe going and having a beer or a spirit or whatever else. So I'm off to the artist social club, La Fenice, to drown my sorrows, sort my nerves out, and go from there. Okay, so as we were saying, Ostian, he's upset at Primarch. He's just a mortal man. He can't help himself. It's time to go to the bar, drown his sorrows, and hopefully find some solace. And while he's there, that's where he runs into the poet.
Yes, and they're sort of exchanging tales of woe. And while he's sitting there feeling sorry for himself, he's interrupted by Lucius, who says, I want you to introduce me to Serena.
Yeah.
And Austin's like, oh, why? He's like, well, so she can paint me. Which I think is quite an odd turn for Lucius, because although we know that he's very self-absorbed, we haven't had that sort of look into his personality that he would want himself painted. I don't know, he's been looking at he's been down the Hall of Heroes or whatever, and with everybody else, and they look at the statues, but this is the first sort of real I suppose it's not the first sort of self-indulgence we've had, because he does have a big ego of himself.
He's quite vain. I mean, so we don't get much of it in this book. If this was the first introduction you'd had to Lucius, you wouldn't necessarily know it. But in previous books, like it's marked on that he's
a pretty boy.
He's very pretty. He's quite handsome. And obviously we've talked about it briefly before. He's had his nose busted now, and he hasn't had it fixed because he's, why he's done that. Why he hasn't had it fixed, we don't know. But up until this moment, he's been, people are, will comment on his striking appearance. As you said, he's a pretty boy, and he is vain. He's definitely vain.
Yeah. Well, now, do you know what, actually, now that we've spoken about it, it actually really does make sense that he'd want his image captured. So that's where we leave those two, with Ostian and being told by Lucius he wants to be painted.
Mm.
And then we get to go back to our one of our favourite characters, Mr. Fabius Bile, who is in his lab prepping for surgery, and he is having his own sort of adaptation done. He's getting some metallic arms attached to his waist that come up over his back. And that's sort of the first time that these are mentioned. So if you know from the model, I guess, and from sort of the pictures, obviously, he's called the Spider because he has these extra arms. And I think this is the first mentioning of this, because I don't think even when we saw him back in the other books, I don't think it was even brought up that he had these on.
No, and it's very much something, and I was never sure, like, because they are brought up in this particular instance. I don't know whether it's something that, because very much moving on, like with the model and the lore, he's never without them.
Yeah.
However, I don't know whether it's something, I don't think it's. I think it's something he can take on and off, and I think it's something he has at this moment anyway is using for surgical purposes and also for discretion. Because although he could have servitors there doing a lot of this stuff for him, it's actually better that he's got these kind of connected arms that he can control directly, through his body, rather than having third parties that might need, mind wiping or upkeep or whatever else is required. It's easier if he can just do it himself with these additional arms.
It probably ties in as well to the Emperor's Children. It's another, I can do it better on my own.
Yeah.
And I've created something to help. So yeah, I guess this must be he's created them especially for this new line of work that he's got himself into. And on his table is our other good friend Eidolon,
yes.
Who's well and truly been anaesthetized by now. Because he did say, when I get back, I want to be the first person that's enhanced.
Mm-hmm.
I want to be the best. It's going to be me. And very strangely, he's already on the table. He's already been anaesthetized. And he then asks Fabius, what is the surgery that I'm going to have?
Yeah.
And which baffled me when I would have thought somebody like that, would have wanted to know what they were getting into before they let themselves get strapped to the table. But then I guess we've learned that Eidolon's not the most competent leader. And Fabius tells him that he has created the ability that he will be able to produce a shriek similar to those of the lair. And he produces the part that's going to go in, which is replicated from the Lear corpse.
Mm-hmm.
And Eidolon is not happy, as he doesn't want Xenos parts put within him, because obviously up until this point, we don't like Xenos. We've just destroyed a whole race of humans for just partnering with a Xenos race, and now you're actually going to put a Xenos body part inside, and not just an Astartes, a Lord Commander.
Yeah.
And Fabius pretty much tells him, it's too late. You're numb.
You're going to be under in a minute. There's nothing
relax.
You can do.
This is happening.
What's interesting there as well is, again, and it's Eidolon. No one likes Eidolon, and that's fine. But he's not. Again, like Eidolon, Fabius, Lucius, they're not. They're not corrupted. They're not necessarily under the sway. Like Fulgrim's got his sword. Julius was Marius. They're down. Well, Julius was down on the planet. Marius was fighting through it as well. There's hints and direction towards corruption there, whereas Eidolon hasn't had that.
No.
But he is now obviously being implanted with this lair hybrid organ, and like any good Astartes, he's like, whoa, no Xenos stuff, that's not what we wanted. This is not what it's supposed to be about. But yeah, old Fabius isn't having any of that.
You volunteered. But like you say, like everybody now, we're slowly getting their reasoning. Like you say, so Fulgrim and the sword, Julius and the mist, Solomon, he's fine at the minute because he didn't make it. Marius is feeling bad and he's trying to play up, so he will do what he's told to get back into the good books. So he's not even making decisions now. He's just doing what he's told. Lucius, he's very arrogant. He's the best one. But Eidolon, we've already seen he's not respected by anybody. Fulgrim obviously has some respect for him, otherwise he wouldn't be in that position. But when he went to Horus's fleet, he was shouted down and disrespected left, right, and centre by everybody.
No one
he made crap decision after crap decision on murder. So is he and he's obviously, before they went, he must have always had this streak of not being the best. So he said, I'm going to be the first one to get these improvements.
Yeah.
So he's above everyone. And then obviously coming back from murder, he knows the truth of it. Even though he's told this fantastic tale of how good he is, he knows that he needs to make improvements. So yeah, I think that's why he's definitely up for these alterations, and also probably why he's a bit of a prick, because he's got to make up for it somehow, hasn't he?
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah, so we're starting to see, like you said, everyone's taking a direction for their own reasons. They're not necessarily corrupted, but like we said before, some people are just dicks. So on 28-4, the Emperor's children who went down to the planet, Fulgrim, Julius, Marius, and Solomon, arrive at the ruins, which is just basically a large arch, and they can't work out what the purpose of it is, but they're all taken in by the beauty of it. And Fulgrim especially, just he's so impressed with just like how pure the place is, and he decrees that they're not going to settle. They're not going to take this for the Imperium. They're going to flag it down as their property. Yeah. But that's about it. And Solomon does openly question, isn't this why we're on our Great Crusade? We're here to find planets. We're here to take them over. Just because this has got no one on it, that should make this more desirable.
Still, we need to settle it. It needs to have an Imperium. Like, it needs a governor. Needs Imperial troops. It needs
exactly. They've got ships and ships full of people that they could leave here to take it over and start fresh. And it's what the Emperor has decreed. This is the whole point of it. But Fulgrim says, no, we're not going to do that. Julius, he sides with Fulgrim. I mean, he's been affected by the mist of the Lair Temple, so there's no going to be arguing there. Marius, doesn't matter what he thinks, he's still ashamed of his failures. And so he agrees with Fulgrim because that's the only way back into the good books. And the only person who actually stands on Solomon's side is Sol Tarvitz. Yeah. Undesirable number one. And I think as a result of this, Solomon's already, in Fulgrim's twisted mind, stepped on his toes once.
He has.
And now Sol has spoken up against Fulgrim, not in any serious way. He's just aired his opinion. Yeah. But now this is his first marking of, you're not with us, you're against us, which is probably going to play into some decision making later on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So they leave that planet as they found it, and over the next 2 weeks they visit a number of similar planets with the same outcome. They're all untouchable. They're all there's no one on them. They're all lovely planets. Fulgrim doesn't want to do anything with them other than mark them down. Solomon's getting frustrated because this isn't what they're here to do.
Yeah.
He becomes friendly with Tarvitz, and his opinion has completely gone 180 now. he's seen Tarvitz will stand up for what he believes in, or he'll air his opinion even in front of the Primarch. And now he's starting to think, actually, Tarvitz is going to be more than a line officer. He's actually a leader.
Yeah.
And he sends a number of messages to Eilidon, because Sol falls under Eidolon's half
command.
of the command. But these messages go completely unanswered.
Yeah.
So Solomon, obviously frustrated, he goes and seeks out his Lord Commander, Vespasian.
Vespasian, yeah.
Vespasian. And he tells Solomon that his honesty is getting him noticed for all the wrong reasons. Whereas before, he would have been a welcomed voice to the committee. Now it's not as welcome. And they both discuss the changes that are going on, and they both agree with each other that something bad is going on, but they can't quite figure out what it is. Like the attitude and the culture is definitely taking a turn, but they just can't put their finger on it. Solomon tells him that it must be something that's happened from the Lair Temple, as those that have gone are the ones that are showing the traits of change.
They talk about the fact that it's like a place of worship, don't they? And they talk about the fact that maybe, or Solomon ventures the idea that it's perhaps, they're aware of these, beings and forces that exist in the warp, and that maybe that place, that temple, was a place where that fabric between the materium and the warp was maybe thinner, and maybe something nefarious was reaching out.
Yeah, and then he sort of gets told, watch your mouth, because that's naughty talk. But even then, like the Lord Commander, he does take it on board and says, I'll mention it to Fulgrim. And they sort of have this sort of understanding that something's not going on. But like we've seen already, everyone just sort of carries on as normal because no one wants to rock the boat too hard. So we join Serena, who is in the Remembrances Bar, and she is loving it. She's completely of the opposite opinion of Ostian. She thinks that the decoration and the music is beautiful, and she's obviously jealous that she can't recreate anything that looks this good, even though she probably could do. And she's here, and she's a bit of a ruin compared to what she was. Her hair's all matted and unwashed. She's not looking after herself, and she's really covered in scars now. She's been self-harming quite severely as she's been trying to paint her current masterpiece. And where before her blood picked up that perfect color, it's not doing the job anymore. So she's smashing things to pieces and getting the ump. And here she meets our friend the poet, who Ostian was talking to earlier, whose name is Leopold.
Leopold, yeah.
Yeah, and he tells her that he loves her work, and she lies to him, and she says, yeah, I love your poetry as well. Would you like to come back to mine? We can look at some art and read some poetry. And just to seal the deal, they have a nice kiss, and she bites him on the lip, which hurts him, causes him a bit to bleed, and that encourages her to get him back to her studio. And they end up back at the studio, and one thing leads to another, and end up having sex on the floor. He's obviously, when they go in there, he's quite shocked by the state of the place, but
the state and the smell. That's the bit that is pointed out as well, because she's been using not only her blood but all sorts of stuff to paint.
Anything that's coming out of her, I guess. But I mean, and this shows quickly the sort of how lowly this Leopold is, because obviously Ostian, this guy's been sat in this bar for however long that he's met two of our main characters already. He's just been sat there drinking, so he's not, and no one thinks his poetry is any good. And Serena, who probably was beautiful not too long ago, she's got scraggly hair, she's covered in scars, and she's not looking after herself. But he's run back to her room just to get his end away. I mean, I guess it's the beer goggles.
I don't know. But as I said, what happens on the crusade stays on the crusade, right?
Yeah. And so they have sex, and it's all very well and good. And just as he finishes, she picks up a broken piece of glass or a bit of the portrait. And before he knows what's happening,
it's a palette knife, I think.
Oh, is it a palette knife?
She's got a sharpened palette knife.
Well, Leopold doesn't know what it is, but whatever it is, it goes in and she cuts his throat and enjoys watching him die. Yeah, so that's the end of our poor poet there.
The good news is that the red. The good news is the red of his blood is bang on for what she's after.
Perfect, so, better than her own blood.
Indeed, and she's got loads of it now.
Oh yeah, she's got bags of it. Elsewhere, the vanguard of the Emperor's children pick up a signal from an alien vessel of none other than Eldred himself.
Yeah.
And he sends them a message saying hello. And that ends chapter 13. Quickly, we jump back to Ostian. It sort of jumped over the place. So before we really get into Eldred, Ostian goes to visit Serena.
Mm-hmm.
Probably either a couple of hours or a couple of days after that incident with Leopold.
I think it's a couple of days.
Yeah, he's banging on the door, no answer, and eventually, as he's about to walk away, she opens up and lets him in, and he's absolutely disgusted, like with the state of it. He's completely shocked. Where, as we've mentioned ages ago, he was the messy one and she was very clean and tidy. But now their roles are reversed. But now she's living in filth. She's a mess. She's even more of a mess than a couple of days ago. It absolutely stinks in there. He can't work out what it is. He goes over to the barrel. There's a barrel which we know has the rest of Leopold in it, in some acid, and that's where the smell was coming from. He goes to open it, and she basically begs him to get out before she does something she'll regret.
Yeah.
And he tries to offer her help, and she refuses. So after a bit of an argument, he leaves, and that's the last they see of each other for now. And so going back, Eldred has introduced himself. He sent a welcoming message, and he and Fulgrim, all their representatives, have been going back and forth for some time to try and broker a meeting.
Yeah.
Solomon, the good guy, the loyal Astartes, has decreed that they should go to war and destroy the Eldar
straight away. No question. Get it done.
And I mean, we find out he's not without reason, because he's met the Eldar before and they have had some fierce battles.
Yeah.
But the point being, these aren't the same Eldar probably, and they said all he's done is say hello, and Solomon wants to kill this third alien race.
Xenos, get rid of it.
Exactly. and that's what the good guys are doing. But Fulgrim, he's very bohemian now. He's in a new frame of mind, and he's like, "No, they're not hostile. They've come as friends."
Yeah, he makes a convincing argument. He sort of says something about he doesn't want to look back. Like he says that there's a lot of men that if they look back, there'd be moments that they wish they could do differently, and he doesn't want this to be one of those moments.
No, not at all. So he's trying to. Maybe this is Fulgrim in a more lucid stage where he's trying to do something right. But then I think a Primarch coming across Eldar would probably want to destroy them. So the purpose of this isn't completely clear. What's going on in Fulgrim's mind that actually encourages him to do this.
It's a strange one. You would. So it's a very. So this is where it becomes a bit weird actually, because the Eldar and the like the humans of the 41st millennium and the 30K as well. They're not always at war with the Eldar. Like sometimes they ally for certain things. They're involved in various crucial storylines at the moment in the 40K universe. I won't spoil anything here. So they're not odds, and actually it's like the Imperial Truth is actually about or the Crusade is about regaining the lost planets and capturing new ones. And actually, in this sort of instance, there have been occasions where actually it's like, do you know what? You're on a craft world. That's not a planet. You don't mess with us. We won't mess with you. Which is kind of very at odds with the Disparex that we sort of came across first. They're like, I'm just leave us alone. But because they had humans, they were like, well, we can't leave you alone. Whereas with this one, it's because they're slightly different. The old Eldari, they have this weird stalemate where they don't necessarily kill on sight. Some of them do. Obviously, Solomon's like, no, word of the Emperor. Let's get this done.
Sure.
Whereas Fulgrim's not quite convinced yet.
Yeah. So he's keen to, for whatever reason, he wants to go down and make peace. And I have to say, like the rest of this part of part 3, I love this. What happens now? I read this twice again. So after a lot of back and forth, they agree to meet on neutral territory on a planet named Tarsus.
Yep.
And the who's who of the Emperor's children accompany Fulgrim. Both Lord Commanders go down. Julius, Solomon, Marius, Saul Tarvitz, and Lucius, to name our key players, all get the invite.
Yeah.
When they arrive, they get to another arch, similar to what we've seen on every unclaimed planet so far. And Eldred is sat down, I think, basically at a picnic table. But the strange thing is he has basically an army behind him. He's got a couple of tanks, a lot of soldiers, and he's got a Wraith Lord by the name of Kyrane Goldhelm.
Yeah, Kyrian Goldhelm.
Kyrian Goldhelm, which I guess is the equivalent of a dreadnought.
Yes. So a bit of Eldar lore here. So yeah, they're in the same way that they're made from like the same material as the craft world and their armor. It's exactly that. A Wraith Lord is a dead Eldar. But what happens to the Eldar when they die? What they've done since the birth of Slaanesh is, because if basically what the other thing the craft worlds do is they have this circuit that contains these stones. So these rune stones, soul stones, whatever you call them. And actually, when an Eldar dies, their soul goes into this stone, and it's that stone that protects them from She Who Thirsts or Slaanesh. And if it wasn't for these soul stones, the soul of the Eldar would be consumed by Slaanesh. And with these Wraith Lords, they are powered by these soul stones of previously slain warriors. And I believe in Kyrian Goldhelm's case, he was one of these warriors that was slain by a human and Astartes in previous combats, and now powers a Wraith Lord.
Right. So, and he's essentially Eldred's number 2, isn't he, or equal, I guess. He, and like you say, so he's obviously got history. He's very much in Solomon's mindset of he wanted to attack the Emperor's children on first sight rather than meet. But Eldred is obviously, being the Farseer, has seen these horrific events that are coming and thinks maybe he could stop an upcoming war that isn't just going to affect humanity, it could affect everybody. which is strange because humanity seems to be affecting everybody anyway, regardless.
Mhm.
So I don't know what he actually saw, but obviously trying to stop this event must have been preferable to what actually comes to pass. His visions are very blurred, but he decides they're going to meet in person. As Fulgrim arrives with his council, he's invited to the table, and they all sit down. And Solomon's very wary of the soldiers and the tanks.
Yeah.
And the back of the tanks open up, and Solomon's sort of preparing to go for his bolter, but instead of soldiers, hosts come out carrying all sorts of food and drink. So they sit there feasting, and Eldred confesses that they've actually been shadowing the Emperor's children for some time.
Yeah.
Watching what they're doing, and if they had actually settled on that first planet or any of the planets, then the Eldar would have attacked, because these planets are, as you said, maiden worlds for the Eldar. They've been left here to mature. So when they're ready, the Eldar will settle them, and they will have new homeworlds. But Eldred, the reason Eldred hasn't attacked is because Fulgrim didn't settle.
Yeah.
He went back to his ship, and they left them alone. And this is why Eldred thinks actually maybe Fulgrim is the key to stopping whatever it is I'm seeing happening. And Fulgrim says, "Well, I didn't want to ruin the natural beauty. Like these planets are wonderful. We don't want to damage it." And they get to the point where, after Eldred's explained, actually these are our worlds, then Fulgrim demands, "Well, if you've been following us and you haven't attacked us, why are you here?" And Eldred tells him, and basically breaks him now, and tells him, actually, I've envisioned Horus. I don't think he names him as Horus. I think he just says,
Calls
"Your
him the War Master.
Yeah. He's been grievously wounded on a planet called Davin, and he's dying, and he's also been betrayed by his most trusted advisor. And he tells him, "But don't worry, Horus is going to recover, but it would be better if he died."
Yeah.
Because he's going to betray the Emperor. I think Fulgrim bangs on the table, breaks the table in half. He is absolutely livid, because not only has he told him that Horus is dying, but he's also told him it would be better if Horus actually just died.
Yeah.
Which is horrendous on its own. But then to tell him Horus is about to betray the Emperor, so that's a double whammy of that. You don't say this to an Astartes. You definitely don't say this to a Primarch.
No, and not even. Well, no, you just wouldn't. Primarchs don't go for this sort of thing. Even those that may be slightly tainted by chaos at this point, they're not cool with it. Horus is, especially for Fulgrim as well. Like, he looks up to Horus, like a lot of them do. There's no way, like, this is the peak of heresy to suggest that not only is Horus, falling to chaos, like, that he's been, he's wounded and could potentially die, but he's not going to. But it would be better if he did, and that he's gonna, like, betray the Emperor. No. That's a big no. This is, like, Solomon. That everyone's going to be itching right now, and the fact that Fulgrim has, stood up and bashed the table, you're like, okay, this might escalate.
Yeah, and it's not even. It doesn't matter if you're tainted or you're not tainted. Everybody is pissed off now.
Yeah.
Like you've offended everybody at this table. Even the more level-headed ones aren't going to stand for this. And essentially, as a result of Fulgrim's outburst, everybody draws their weapons. The Eldar and the Emperor's children are all on a standoff, and Fulgrim demands an explanation. And Eldred tells him that Horus is currently in a state, and he's being tormented and teased by chaos gods, and he's not going to be strong enough to win against them. He's going to accept what they tell him, because not that Horus is actually a bad person or a bad being, but the chaos gods are going to offer him what he thinks is the right option, and Horus is going to absolutely take him. And Fulgrim demands an explanation again and says, "What are you talking about? And what is a chaos god?" And this has, I mean, I don't know what an Eldar naturally looks like, but I imagine the color drained from Eldred's face at this point, because he's absolutely devastated that he learns that humanity are traveling through the warp, but they have little to no idea of what's going on.
It's amazing. It is an amazing moment where he kind of realizes that they've got, at this point, the humans he's talking to, they're using the warp like let's jump in, they're using it like the tube, right? And has got no idea that chaos exists, and it's like mind blowing for him. He's like, what?
Yeah, it's like, how are you? Because to that, he knows what's in the warp. I mean, Slanesh being key point, he knows where that came from. He's obviously got the sight. He knows how to even use the warp to see what's going on millennia light years away. And then he's got these Mon K traveling around like it's a party bus. And he explains that Horus is being corrupted as they speak. He's going to accept the false gods' promises. And at this point, even now, Fulgrim draws his sword, and he's not carrying Fireblade, he's carrying the Lair sword. And Eldred immediately sees the sword. He sees the purple stone pulsing, and knows exactly what it is. And he's gutted that he's made this mistake, and he calls for his men to, I think he shouts, they're corrupted, and kill them.
Gotta kill them.
Gotta kill them all. And Eldred, he runs back, he gets back to the arch, which we find out is actually for teleportation. And he teleports back to the craft world. And at this point, fighting breaks out, and it is awesome. So before it even really gets started, Fulgrim, just with his sword, he destroys a tank.
He does. He takes out one of the grab tanks pretty quick.
Smashes it to pieces. I guess grab tanks are, if you play Eldar, are there models for those?
There are indeed. So they're called grab tanks because they kind of like they hover. So they're the way they're described. So they're not called out as grab tanks in the book. In the same way that the fighting units, the Eldar on, like they face howling banshees and then guardians. They're called, but they're the tanks they're referring to are grav tanks, and you can they're playable models. Cool.
So it's I guess it's an impressive feat. Even Fulgrim, he can just smash it up with his sword and completely take it out. But he takes out that tank, and then the Wraith Lord Goldhelm attacks him and manages to injure Fulgrim. But rather than actually taking him down, Fulgrim is energized by the pain. And they have a King Kong versus Godzilla moment. And the Wraith Lord is probably more powerful normally than Fulgrim, but Fulgrim has the added buff of pain doesn't really affect him. Spurs him on, if anything, and he's able to use his sword and take down the Wraith Lord, and he smashes it open with his fists. And inside, as you've mentioned, is inside its head is this pulsing red stone, and Fulgrim can feel the consciousness of this stone. He can feel fear and hatred coming out from it, and he can feel that this is the Wraith Lord's consciousness. And he picks it up, and with his hand, he just crushes the stone and kills the Wraith Lord. And as he does this, the sword in his lair sword grows warm, and the jewel hilt glows even more, and he can feel that the sword is actually absorbing the soul of the Wraith Lord.
The soul is sent into the warp, and it's being consumed by the entity that inhabits the gem or the stone on Fulgrim's sword.
Which, if you know, the very basic, like you explained as well, and the very basic Eldar lore that I know, that when the Eldar die, their soul goes into the warp, and that's what Slaanesh's demons feast on. So that's like the big no-no, because when you die, it's not, is there a heaven and a hell? It's when you die, your soul's getting eaten by Slaanesh's worshippers or Slaanesh's beings.
Yeah.
And Eldred, who managed to get back onto his ship, feels the death of Goldhelm, and he can actually feel the soul being killed and eaten by what he calls the great enemy.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result, he vows to kill Fulgrim, who has been corrupted by that sword. And he starts rallying his troops. Back on Tarsus, the Emperor's children have managed to destroy the Parley force, all but one tank, which has moved all the way back in retreat and is sort of keeping an eye on from a distance. All our main characters have survived.
As I was going to say, has Lucius got himself one of the swords yet?
He may have. Yes, he has. Because he gets told to put it down.
Yes, again.
I think it's Tarvitz tells him to put it down.
You know what happened on Murder? Put it down.
Yeah. Stop picking this stuff up. But all our main characters survived. But actually, the entire Phoenix Guard were killed by the Wraith Lord in the struggle with Fulgrim. And as they're resting up and regrouping, more Eldar begin to appear from our teleporter arch in absolutely overwhelming numbers. And they're pouring out, and Eidolon calls for a Stormbird to come and collect them. Which Fulgrim isn't impressed with, as he's quite happy to stay and fight. But he's sort of convinced, actually, we're not probably going to fare too well here. As they start retreating towards where the Stormbird's coming in, it's completely blown out of the sky, and lands sort of on top of a hill, and the surviving Emperor's children make way up to the wreckage, and they manage to sort of fortress themselves at the top of the hill. And they just sustain wave after wave of Eldar warriors. And they obviously, if you're not a main character, if you're a red shirt, you're getting killed, but otherwise you're doing okay. And we get some really good descriptions here of like the heroics of the Emperor's children. So you can forget whether they're corrupted or not, but we're sort of looking through Marius's eyes now, that he noticed that even Eidolon's fighting style has changed. He's still there fighting, but he's taken out groups of warriors on his own that normally he probably wouldn't be able to do. But and Marius is hearing this screech that he doesn't recognise, and seeing warriors get sent all over the place, and he suspects that it must be Eidolon, but he's not actually seeing that for himself because he's too busy fighting. Everyone's putting a good account for themselves. Obviously, Fulgrim's going to be up there. Vespasian, he's got his warhammer and he's smashing people up left, right, and centre. Solomon, Tarvitz, Lucius is just a killing machine. He's got his sword. He's got the Eldar sword that he shouldn't have, and they're just, anybody that's getting too close is getting absolutely butchered. And after the final sort of wave, they get a bit of a respite, recover and see who's still alive. And they start hearing chanting coming from down below from the arch. And then this, what's described as a huge mechanical beast comes out of the arch, and they sort of say it's a towering horror of dark iron, and it's got lava just pouring out of it, like through its veins, but all down it's just this big metal monster that's just pouring with fire.
The avatar of Kane.
The avatar of Kane. Has that got some lore behind it?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So Kane is the Eldar god of war. So like the Eldar gods are like, they're there to provide certain different bits and pieces for the Eldar, and Kane is their embodiment of battle and war. He's there to protect the race, but also embodies their more aggressive tendencies. So whereas one of the gods, I can't remember her, I think it's her name, is like held in prison in Nurgle's garden, Kane is their embodiment of war. And what happens, I believe this happens, and Eldar players can correct me, but aspect warriors, which is, as an Eldar, you follow a path, and you might be an aspect warrior, or you follow a certain aspect. And so like the Howling Banshees are aspects, the Striking Scorpions are aspects, and so on and so forth. And as you progress, you might get to a point where you can become imbued, and you effectively become the avatar of Kane. So you're not Kane, but you are a representation of his form on the battlefield.
So is this Eldred controlling this, or is this just something entirely on its own, do you think?
Yeah, no,
I can't remember if it's described.
He's entirely on his own. He is, he's just a representation of this god of war.
Okay.
And basically, it's almost like the spirit of Kane has effectively possessed an Eldar warrior.
Okay.
And has come onto the battlefield. Now that this particular, normally it ends in death, like for the warrior that's inhabited by Kane at this point. But while he's going, he is this massively powerful, like in the lore, Primarch equivalent power rating. It does tend to be, though, that on that, like in other books, it's almost like if you want to give someone a buff, or to use wrestling parlance, to put someone over, you always get them to beat Kane.
Oh, right.
and that's what it is. Kane puts people over. The avatar of Kane will put people over.
Fair enough.
He's supposed to be incredibly strong.
Okay. Well, and that brings me on. So it says here, like, the creature is a match for Fulgrim, in size and stature and power. And as they sort of square up, Fulgrim up on the hill and the beast from below, it throws a spear at Fulgrim, and he's able to duck out the way. And Fulgrim laughs, and the voice in the back of his head says, "Don't be a fool, pay attention." And Fulgrim turns around and sees the spear boomerang back towards him, and he's just able to get out the way in time of the second strike. And he gets into hand-to-hand combat with this beast, and I don't think we'd be able to talk up the fight in enough detail for it. Like, you need to read this.
Read it. It's one of those bits that you want to read. It's a really good battle. You
need to like go and read like chapter 14 and 15. If you're not going to read the whole books, just for the fight, this battle alone, it's definitely worth it. But eventually, after what must have been an epic fight, Fulgrim then smashes his fist through this the beast's head straight through his face, which causes severe burns because obviously this thing's covered in lava to his hand, but he's able to ignore the pain. And this is the first time where Fulgrim's actually been injured.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mention that he felt pleasure. He just ignores the pain. He doesn't embrace it or anything like that. He just carries on. And he's able to then wrap his hands around this beast's throat and chokes the life out of it. So he's got a machine of lava and metal, and he chokes it to death, all while his hands are burning, which I think the power of a Primarch and the power of being possessed is unmatched. And yeah, so he kills this thing, and then as it dies, it rolls, must roll a 6 because the beast explodes and throws Fulgrim through the air. And he loses grip of the sword as he's going through the air, and as he's going sort of through the air and out of consciousness, he's having visions of a demon god, and hears the name Slaanesh repeated in chants over and over. And he lands, and he gets back to his feet, and all he can think about is the sword.
Yeah.
And as everyone's coming to his aid to try and make sure he's okay, he's pushing past, and he goes and pulls the sword out of the ground. But as he's reaching for it, part of his mind is telling him to leave it. Leave the sword, but he just needs it. And he picks the sword up, all of his mind comes back to him, and he sees the remaining Eldar retreating through the arch. And he's absolutely furious that this parlay, this peace treaty turned by no fault of his own, by the Eldar, and he turns to the Lord Commanders to get back onto their ships and make ready the virus bomb. As he is going to destroy these Eldar maiden worlds. And that brings us to the end of part 3.
Well, I was going to say, what happens when he does this is, I think it's Vespasian questions him, and it's like, well, hang on, like, because at this point, it's only the War Master or the Emperor that can
authorize this,
sanction the use of virus bombs, and he's like, nope, like virus bomb the shit out of them. We're done here. Let's get it done.
Yeah, and like we covered, like we know the virus bombs are going to be used, but as we covered in the last books, they're a big no-no. Like even the Emperor's used them sparingly and doesn't like doing it.
No.
And we know that Horus obviously authorizes it on Istvan 3, and he's got Erebus whispering in his ear, and then he's corrupted by the god that he meets on Davin. Fulgrim hasn't been corrupted for very long.
No.
And at this point, we're only just really learning of the full extent of it. And he's straight to virus bomb. Like,
yeah. It's amazing how quick he goes to it. He's like, just virus bomb him. No question, straight in there. Let's get the old virus bombs out. It's man. And like you said, when they first got onto these planets and Solomon wanted to inhabit them, he questioned the Primarch. Soltavitz questioned the Primarch, and now they're going to virus bomb them. And Vespasian is now questioning the Primarch. And if you're not with us, you're against us. Yeah.
But yeah, so far we are 3 parts in. We've destroyed 2 alien races and had a mega fight with the Eldar.
And destroyed a few of their maiden worlds. Couldn't wipe out the Eldar. That would be tough. But has done the next best thing and taken out a few of their worlds.
Exactly, and we're Slaaneshing it up.
The big reveals happened. We know it's Slaanesh now.
Yeah.
We know
And
it's, the many names for that god, but yeah, Slanesh is what it's all about.
yeah. So we're powering through this. I mean, and again, like this, so much has happened. That should be another book of its own, because it's very much wrapped up that sort of section of history of the lore and set in stone.
Yeah.
The further fall of Fulgrim to chaos.
Indeed, and exciting stuff still to come, though.
Oh yeah, the next two parts definitely. Like part 4, we're going to see some big consequences. Lines are going to be drawn, and I think the truth is going to come out before the showdown in part 5.
Yeah.
But before we start spoiling and jumping ahead, we will we'll wrap it up with any final thoughts, or we'll just say goodbye, I guess.
I think I was the only final bit that or the bit that I find interesting as we get through part 3. The bit that I like is it's always nice to have a bit of it. Like the thing with Fulgrim, I was going to say, it's always nice to have a bit of an introduction. I think with Fulgrim, as in the book, not the Primarch himself, it's the first in the series that really introduces us to a lot of other characters. So whereas the first 3 or 4, you've focused on like the Lunar Wolves and the actual heresy itself, or the start of the heresy. In this, not only do we get the Emperor's Children, we also get a lot more of the Iron Hands and that Primarch on Primarch kind of relationship. But then we also get introduced to the Elder, and all of these are great jumping off points for more lore. But we could go on for hours about it if we could. But it's a good book. It's really fun to read.
We all our tangents, I'm sure we'll put aside and we will cover in podcasts with the other guys.
Yeah.
Eventually. But I can't wait to. Well, I don't want to get to the end of this because I'm enjoying it, but I can't wait to get on to the next part.
Yes.
So we'll say goodbye and we'll see you in part 4.
Yeah.
Threshold. So if you haven't already, like, share, subscribe, Google us. We're Iron and Ceramite on Instagram and everywhere else. And we will see you next time.